She walked up to me at my husband's graveside, dirt still fresh, flowers still standing, and announced to everyone within earshot that the 2-year-old on her hip was his son, my own sister, the person I had shared everything with. She said it like she was doing me a favor. Like the truth had been too heavy to carry alone, and she was finally ready to set it down. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, is that I had been ready for this moment longer than she realized. And I was not going to fall apart, not even close.
If you're watching this video, tell me where you're from or what time it is for you. Marcus Eugene Whitfield did not want a big funeral. He told me that twice. Once as a joke when we watched some televised celebrity memorial, and once seriously late at night on the back porch, the kind of conversation you have when you are happy enough to think about death without being afraid of it. He said he wanted something small, maybe at the lake where he used to fish with his father. A few people who actually knew him, some good food afterward, and nobody crying too long. He got none of that. What he got was 240 people packed into Calvary Baptist on a Thursday morning in October, more flowers than I have ever seen in one room, and a eulogy from his fraternity brother that went on so long the funeral director had to catch my eye twice from across the room. Marcus was 41 years old. He had a cardiac event on a Tuesday while he was making coffee. He was gone before the ambulance arrived. We had been married for 9 years. I want you to understand something about that day before I tell you what happened at the cemetery. I was not performing grief. I was not holding myself together through sheer willpower so people would think I was strong. I was genuinely, completely numb in the way that only happens when your body has decided that full feeling would be too dangerous right now. I moved through that morning like I was watching it happen to someone else. I shook hands. I accepted hugs. I said, "Thank you. I know, he really was. Yes, it was sudden. Thank you so much for coming." Over and over, for 3 hours. By the time we got to the cemetery, I had nothing left. The graveside service was smaller. Just family and close friends gathered under a white tent while the October wind came in cold off the field. I stood at the front next to Marcus's mother, Lorraine, and his older brother, Darnell, and I stared at the casket and thought about the way Marcus used to leave his coffee mug on every single surface in the house except the kitchen counter, which was the one place designed specifically for coffee mugs. I thought about that for a long time. It was easier than thinking about the alternative. That was when I heard Renata's heels on the grass. My sister has a sound. I do not know how else to explain it. She has always moved like she knows people are watching, and the sound of her walking into a room, any room, carries a particular kind of intention. I heard her before I saw her, and when I turned, she was already positioned exactly where she needed to be seen by most of the people standing under that tent. She was wearing all black, which was appropriate. Her hair was done, which was not surprising. And she was carrying Caleb on her hip, her 2-year-old son, round-cheeked and wide-eyed and completely unaware that his mother had just walked into a situation she had clearly spent time planning. She looked at me, and then she looked at the people around me, and then she spoke. She didn't shout. That's what I want you to understand. Renata has never needed to shout. She has a voice that carries without effort, smooth and low and practiced, and she aimed it at just the right angle so that everyone who mattered would hear every word. "Deja," she said, "I need to tell you something. I should have said it before now, and I'm sorry for that." She paused. She shifted Caleb on her hip so his face was more visible. This little boy is Marcus's son. They were together for over a year. I kept quiet because I didn't want to hurt you, but now that Marcus is gone, Caleb deserves to know who his father was. He deserves what's his. The tent went silent. And I mean actually silent. The wind was still moving. A bird was somewhere in the trees behind the funeral home. But every single human being under that canopy stopped breathing for a moment, and I could feel all of them turn toward me at the same time, waiting. Marcus's mother made a sound I had never heard from her before. Darnell stepped forward, then stopped. My Aunt Cheryl put her hand over her mouth, and I stood there looking at my sister. At the careful arrangement of her expression, the just right amount of tears, the way she was holding Caleb slightly forward like he was evidence. And I felt something move through me that was not grief and was not rage. It was almost like relief, because here is what Renata did not know, what she could not have known, what I had been carrying quietly for 6 years inside my marriage. Marcus could not have fathered any children, not Caleb, not anyone's. It was a medical fact, documented across multiple doctors and multiple years, beginning with a complication from surgery when Marcus was 8 years old. My sister had just stood at my husband's grave and told the most provably false lie she had ever told in her life. I looked at her. I said very evenly, "That's interesting, Renata." She blinked. I don't think that was the response she had prepared for. "We'll talk," I said, and I turned back to the casket. Later, people would tell me I was in shock, that I hadn't fully processed what she said, that my calm response was a sign of how badly she had broken me. That's fine. Let them think that. The truth is, I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from saying what I actually knew, because I had learned enough in 36 years of watching my sister operate to understand one thing clearly. The moment was hers. The courtroom, eventually, would be mine. Let me take you back. Marcus and I started trying to have children in year 2 of our marriage. We were not in a rush. We wanted to travel first, wanted to settle into the house, wanted to just be married for a while without that particular pressure. But by the time we decided we were ready, nothing was happening. Months passed. We tried the obvious things. Then we tried the less obvious things. Then we found ourselves sitting in the waiting room of a reproductive endocrinologist on a Wednesday afternoon, both of us pretending to read magazines. The specialist was thorough. She pulled Marcus's complete medical history, including records from his childhood, and that was when she found the notation about a surgery he'd had at 8 years old, a procedure that had developed complications that had been documented carefully, followed up through his teenage years, and ultimately confirmed when he was 16. Marcus was completely and permanently sterile. He already knew. He had known for years. He had never told anyone. He told me that night at the kitchen table. He held both my hands in his, and he looked at me in a way I had only seen him look at me a few times before. Completely unguarded, no armor, just the actual Marcus underneath everything. He said he had been ashamed of it since he was a teenager. Said he had told himself he would figure out the right time to tell me, and then the right time never came. And then we were married, and telling me felt even harder. He apologized more times than I needed him to. I told him to stop. We got second opinions. 2 more specialists over the following year, because we are both stubborn people who needed to hear a thing more than once before we accepted it. Both confirmed the same findings. Both were sorry they couldn't offer better news. We cried. We talked for a long time about what our family could look like. We made peace with it, the way you make peace with things that hurt, slowly, incompletely, but genuinely. And then we moved forward, just the 2 of us. Nobody else knew. Not Lorraine, not Darnell, not my mother or my father or anyone in either of our families. Marcus had never told a single person, and I had never told a single person because it was ours, private and painful and ours. Standing at that cemetery, watching Renata perform her revelation for an audience of grieving people, I understood with complete clarity that she had just handed me something she had no idea she was handing me. She had chosen a lie that couldn't survive contact with reality. She had bet everything on a story that biology was going to destroy. I just had to wait. My cousin Phyllis drove me home. Phyllis is 42, practical, and constitutionally allergic to nonsense. She was one of the first people to reach me after Marcus died, and the way she helped, not with advice, just with presence and logistics, was the kind of help that you remember. She showed up, she handled things, she did not need to be thanked. In the car, she didn't say anything for the first few minutes. She just drove. The radio was off, the heater hummed. Outside, the October trees were doing the thing they do when the light is going gold and amber and burning at the edges. "What are you going to do?" she asked finally. I looked out the window. "Nothing today." "Deja." "I mean it. Nothing today." I paused. But Renata picked the wrong lie. Phyllis glanced over. "What does that mean?" "It means I know something she doesn't know I know." I looked at my hands in my lap. "I'll explain it when I can. Not yet." Phyllis is the kind of person who understands when to stop asking questions. She nodded and drove. At home, I changed out of my black dress and hung it in the back of the closet. I put on Marcus's old Howard University sweatshirt, the one that had a small bleach stain near the cuff that he'd gotten mad about for approximately 4 days before forgetting entirely. And I made myself a cup of chamomile tea that I carried to the kitchen table and never drank. On the table was Marcus's filing cabinet. I had moved it into the kitchen right after he died because I needed to go through everything, and I hadn't wanted to be in his office alone. The key was on the counter next to the fruit bowl. I sat there for a long time looking at it. Then I got up, unlocked the cabinet, and started looking for what I needed. The medical records were in a manila folder, labeled, in Marcus's handwriting, with just his initials and the year. He had organized it himself at some point, which meant he had thought about this. He had thought about a day when someone might need to know. I spread everything on the kitchen table. The surgical records from his childhood, the follow-up appointments from his teenage years, each one with a physician's note confirming the same finding, the consultation from the specialist we saw 6 years ago, the second opinion, the third, each document methodical, clinical, unambiguous. Taken together, they were as close to irrefutable as paper gets. I made 2 full sets of copies on the machine in Marcus's office. I put the originals back in the folder, put the folder back in the cabinet, and locked it. Then I sat down with 1 copy and read through everything again, slowly, the way you read something when you are preparing to explain it to someone else. It was after 9 when I called Carolyn Webb. Carolyn had handled our estate planning 3 years ago. She was thorough and direct, and the kind of lawyer who remembered details without being asked. When I'd called her after Marcus died about the will, she'd had everything ready before I finished explaining what I needed. She picked up on the 3rd ring. "Carolyn, it's Deja Whitfield. I'm sorry for the hour." "Don't be. What's happening?" I told her. Start to finish, in the flattest, most factual voice I had, because if I let myself get emotional, it would take longer and I was tired. I told her about the graveside announcement, the phone call I was already anticipating from Renata, the medical records on my kitchen table, and what they contained. Carolyn listened without interrupting. I could hear her making notes. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said, "here's what we're going to do." The call started at 8 the next morning. My mother first. She said she hoped I wasn't going to make things difficult. She said Renata was just trying to do right by her child. She said she knew this was painful, but sometimes we had to put family first. She said all of this in the careful, measured tone she used when she had already decided something and was presenting it as an open question. I said I understood. I said I'd be in touch. Darnell called an hour later. He was more direct than my mother, which I had always appreciated about him even when what he was being direct about was wrong. He said Marcus would have wanted Caleb taken care of. He said he'd been thinking about it all night, and he felt certain of that. He said he hoped I would consider doing the right thing here before lawyers got involved. I said I was already in touch with my attorney. He got quiet. My Aunt Cheryl called right after lunch. Cheryl has always been convinced she has a gift for reading people in situations, and she exercises this gift constantly and incorrectly. She told me she had always thought there was something about Caleb's eyes that reminded her of the Whitfield side. She said it warmly, like she was offering comfort. I thanked her for calling. By 3 p.m, I had heard from 6 different relatives, 2 people from our church and 1 woman from Marcus's job, who I had met exactly once at a company picnic, and who apparently felt close enough to the situation to weigh in. Every single one of them had absorbed Renata's version of events as established fact. Not one of them asked me a single question. They called to manage me, not to hear me. I wrote nothing down, but I remembered everything. That evening, I ate leftover rice and watched a nature documentary about migratory birds. I turned the sound off and just watched them move in their enormous formations across the screen, all those small bodies moving together like one organism. I thought about how a flock that size could turn on nothing, some signal too small for human eyes, and shift direction completely. I thought, that's coming. Just not yet. People ask me sometimes, usually people who don't have a sibling like mine, how something like this could happen, how a sister could do this. And I understand why they ask, but the question always tells me they think this was a single bad decision, that Renata woke up one morning and chose to be this person. That is not how it works. Renata has always been Renata, the full version, the consistent version. I have just spent most of my life finding gentler names for it. When I was 14 and she was 16, she told our entire youth group at church that I had been sneaking out to meet a boy named Kevin from the school across town. I had spoken to Kevin exactly once at a bus stop about homework. But Renata had seen us talking and decided, in the way Renata decided things, that the conversation meant something. By Sunday morning, our parents had heard a version of the story in which I was apparently in a secret relationship. My mother cried. My father gave me the quiet disappointment speech. I was grounded for 3 weeks. Renata received prayer and sympathy for the stress of having a difficult younger sister. Kevin, for his part, had no idea any of this was happening. In college, when I started dating a man named Theo, who was steady and kind and completely unimpressed by Renata's particular energy, she began a campaign so subtle I almost didn't recognize it. She would call when she knew we had plans, manufacturing crises that needed my immediate attention. She would tell Theo small, unflattering stories about me under the cover of sisterly affection. I was intense. I was hard to read. I took everything so seriously, bless my heart. She said it all with a warm smile. Theo, to his credit, told me about it. That relationship didn't survive, but not because of Theo. And when I met Marcus and he turned out to be completely immune to her, she shifted strategy. She tried to convince me he was controlling. Then she tried to befriend him and got nowhere. Then she accused him of trying to isolate me from family, which was Renata's way of saying she was losing access to me and didn't like it. The thing about Renata is that she is not evil in the way people mean when they use that word. She's not calculating in some cold, organized way. She's something harder to name. A person who genuinely believes she is the main character of every situation, and who becomes dangerous when the situation does not cooperate with that belief. She doesn't plan harm. She just refuses to be stopped, and the harm is what's left when she's done moving. She had been trying to win something against me since we were children. I could never figure out what exactly, what she wanted, what the prize was supposed to be. Standing at Marcus's grave with Caleb on her hip, I finally understood. She didn't want a specific thing. She wanted to be the one who got things. She wanted to be the one the family rallied around. She wanted, after 38 years, to be the one who won. She had no idea she had already lost. She came 3 days after the funeral, a Thursday late afternoon, while the light was still good, and I was in the middle of going through Marcus's mail. She knocked. I opened the door. She was standing on my porch with Caleb on her hip and a ceramic baking dish covered in foil. She'd done her hair. She was wearing a soft gray top that made her look tired in a sympathetic way. "Can I come in?" she asked. I stepped back from the door. She settled into the armchair in the living room, Marcus's chair, though I didn't say that, and set Caleb on the floor with her keys to keep him occupied. Then she looked at me with the expression she uses when she wants to seem reluctant. "I know the timing was bad," she started. "I know that wasn't the right place or the right moment. I've been struggling with this for a long time, Deja. Years. I didn't know how to tell you." I said. "I never wanted to hurt you. You have to know that. But with Marcus gone, Caleb doesn't have anyone on that side, and I have to think about his future." She paused. "He deserves his father's name. He deserves security." I watched Caleb examine her keys. He was a beautiful kid. Full curls, round cheeks, those huge dark eyes that took in everything. I had spent a lot of time with this child over the past 2 years. I had bought him birthday presents and read him board books and let him fall asleep on my couch during holiday gatherings. Whatever Renata had done, he was not part of it. "What kind of security are we talking about?" I asked. She shifted. "Well, I was thinking we could handle this privately, between sisters, without making it a whole legal thing." Another pause. "The life insurance. I think it's fair that Caleb has access to some of that. And the house..." She glanced around the living room like she was already measuring it. "Marcus's child should probably grow up in his father's house, don't you think? I'm not saying you have to leave immediately. We could work out a timeline." There it was. The house, the insurance, everything Marcus and I had built across 9 years of mortgage payments and Saturday projects and a garden I had planted myself in the backyard. She wanted a timeline for when I would leave my own house. I looked at her steadily. "I need some time to think," I said. Renata nodded, satisfied. She picked up Caleb and the casserole dish and told me she was there for me, whatever I needed, that she hoped we could get through this together as a family. I closed the door behind her and stood in the hallway for a moment. Then I picked up my phone and called Carolyn. 2 days later, Phyllis texted me a screenshot. Renata had put together a group message, a wide one, hitting most of the extended family on both sides, and included a photo of Caleb alongside an old photo of Marcus from maybe 10 years ago, before I knew him. The message was brief. She was just asking for support during a difficult time, and she wanted the family to be able to see the resemblance for themselves because she knew some people had questions. The responses came fast. Heart emojis, praying hands. Oh my goodness, the eyes. He has the exact same mouth. I always thought there was something familiar about that baby. I looked at both photos for a long time. Marcus was light-skinned, with those gray-green eyes he'd inherited from his father's side, and a close cut he kept neat every 2 weeks without fail. Caleb had deep brown skin, full tight curls, and eyes so dark they were almost black. He was a gorgeous kid. He looked absolutely nothing like Marcus. But Renata, here is what Gerald and I had learned enough about how this was going to go to understand that my word alone was not going to be enough for some people. I read them again. Marcus had a way of expressing himself that was specific to him. He didn't emote outward much. He was not a man who said, "I feel," or "this makes me feel." He said things like "that was real," or "I mean that," or "you already know." When he wanted to tell me something mattered to him, he said it sideways. He said, "I was thinking about you earlier," and then changed the subject. He did not say, "Last night changed something for me." That was not his voice. That sentence sounded like someone who had read a lot of romantic text message templates and was doing their best approximation. I called Carolyn. "The texts," I said. "Something's off about the way they're written." "I thought the same thing," she said. "I already reached out to someone, a document examiner. She does forensic linguistics as well as handwriting analysis. I'm sending her the materials tomorrow." "What about the metadata on the messages, the number they were supposedly sent from?" "I've already asked for that from Gerald's office. If they don't have it, that's informative by itself. If they do, we'll see what it matches." I said goodnight and put the copies in a folder. Then I sat in the quiet kitchen for a while. The house made its sounds around me. The refrigerator, the heat coming on, the particular settling noise the back wall makes when the temperature drops at night, a sound I had learned to ignore over 9 years and now could not stop hearing. I picked up my phone and almost called someone, put it back down. There was nobody to call who could make this part easier. I went to bed at 11. I stared at the ceiling until around 2. Then I slept. Which maybe it was always just in her head. But here's the other thing, and this is the part I wasn't sure whether to tell you. She looked at me. I think I know who Caleb's father actually is. I sat very still. His name is Deshaun Mercer. He and Renata were together for a few months. This was right around when Caleb would have been conceived. Deshaun has a daughter from before, maybe 5 or 6 years old, that he has never once acknowledged. His name is not on that little girl's birth certificate. His family has a lot of money, and he has been very careful his whole life about not being attached to things. She looked at her glass. Renata knew all of this. She dated him anyway. And then she ended up pregnant, and Deshaun did what Deshaun does. I thought about the night Renata showed up at my apartment when I was still with my old roommate, before Marcus, crying and saying she'd been with someone who turned out to be unavailable. I had held her on my couch for 2 hours. I had not pushed for details. She picked Marcus, I said slowly, because he was dead and couldn't deny it, and because he had something worth claiming. Phyllis nodded, and because, I said, she has spent her whole life watching me have something she wanted, and this was the first time she saw a way to take it. Phyllis didn't argue with that. We sat with it for a while. Outside, it had started to rain, the light sideways kind that taps against the windows without committing to being a real storm. I drank my wine and thought about Renata at a graveside, and Deshaun Mercer and his careful life, and a little boy with full curls who had nothing to do with any of it. "Thank you," I told Phyllis. "I should have said something sooner." "You said it now." My parents called on a Sunday. They did the thing they had done my entire childhood when they wanted to present a unified front. They put the call on speaker without announcing it, so you'd be talking and then suddenly realize there were 2 people listening. My father cleared his throat at the beginning, which was his way of indicating he was present and engaged even when he was not planning to speak. My mother did the talking. She said the family was concerned. She said this legal situation was causing stress that everybody could feel. She said she understood I had questions, but at some point, questions became stubbornness, and she hoped I could see the difference. She said Renata was upset every day, and that was hard for everyone to watch. Renata was upset every day. My husband had been dead for 3 weeks, but Renata was upset every day. My father cleared his throat again. "We just hope," he said, "that you're thinking about what's right for the child." I said I was thinking about a lot of things. I said I was confident the process would work out correctly. I said I loved them. After I hung up, I sat in the kitchen for a while doing nothing, not crying, not thinking about strategy, not preparing for the next conversation, just sitting. Then I went to Marcus's closet. It still smelled like him. His cedar shoe trees, his deodorant, the particular scent of the fabric on his good suits. I stood in the doorway for a moment, and then I sat down on the floor with my back against the wall, and I pulled one of his old sweatshirts, the gray Howard one, into my lap, and I put my face into it. I cried for maybe 7 minutes. I counted, more or less. Not because I had a limit, but because I was aware that I only had so much room for grief right now, and I needed to use it carefully. Then I folded the sweatshirt, set it on the floor next to me, and sat in the dark quiet of his closet for another few minutes until I felt something settle back into place. Then I got up and went to bed. Carolyn's forensic document examiner, a woman named Dr. Patricia Osei, who had apparently spent 22 years doing this kind of work for courts across 3 states, delivered her preliminary findings 10 days after we sent her the materials. Her report on the handwritten note was careful but clear. The pressure patterns were inconsistent with natural, unself-conscious writing. Several letter formations showed signs of deliberate, slowed construction, the kind of thing you see when someone is copying a style rather than writing in their own hand. One section of the note had a slight tremor in the downstrokes that suggested tension and concentration rather than the relaxed flow of genuine communication. She would not call it a definitive forgery without more comparison samples, but she flagged it as highly suspect. The text message metadata was more straightforward. The number labeled as Marcus in Renata's printout did not match the number in my phone for him. It did not match the number in his phone records, which Carolyn had requested through the estate. It was a number Marcus had apparently never used. Gerald Foster's office, when asked for the original device data, said they were working on it, which was the kind of answer that told you they did not have it. Carolyn called me right after she reviewed everything. "The note is questionable, but not provably forged yet," she said. "The texts are weaker than they looked in that meeting. The number doesn't track." "What do we do?" "We've already filed for court-ordered DNA testing. That's our main event. The document questions are useful context, but the DNA result is going to be the thing that ends this." "How long?" "The motion is in. We should have a hearing date within the week." I thanked her and hung up. I sat with the knowledge for a moment. The documents are suspect, the number is wrong, the records are irrefutable, and I tried to feel something clean and simple about it, relief or certainty or readiness. What I actually felt was tired and sad. Not for myself, or not only for myself, but for the whole thing. For the amount of effort Renata had put into this. For the fact that she had apparently sat somewhere and practiced Marcus's handwriting until she could approximate it. For the fact that she had gone that far and still chosen the one man in the world whose biology made the whole project impossible. I almost wanted to call her and tell her, save us all the time. Instead, I made myself dinner and called Carolyn back with one more question about the hearing timeline. She called me on a Tuesday night. Not the soft, careful Renata. The other one. "I heard you're trying to challenge the note," she said without hello. "And the texts." "My attorney is doing her job," I said. "You're making this so much harder than it needs to be." Her voice had an edge I hadn't heard from her in years. Not since we were teenagers and she'd been caught in something she couldn't explain away. "I have more. If you want to go there, Deja, I have more. I'm trying to be civilized about this, but I can show you more." She probably didn't have more, but I noted that she said it. "If you have additional documentation," I said, "you can share it with Gerald and he can share it with Carolyn. That's what the process is for." "The process?" She almost laughed. It came out wrong. "You're really going to do this to me, to Marcus's son." "Renata," I said. "What?" "I'll see you in court." I hung up. I sat with the phone in my hand for a moment. Outside it was dark and the neighbor's porch light was on, and somewhere down the street a dog was making its feelings known about something. Ordinary Tuesday. The world entirely indifferent to what was happening inside this house. I was not angry. I want to be clear about that. What I felt was closer to the way you feel when you have been carrying something heavy for a long time, and you can finally see the place where you are going to be able to set it down. Not there yet, but close enough to feel the muscles in your arms start to loosen in anticipation. Whatever Renata had been, whatever she still was, she was out of road. The document examiner had found what she found. The DNA motion was filed. The number didn't match. The medical records existed. The truth was not going to change because Renata wanted it to. Judge Anita Rowe had been on the family court bench for 17 years, and she moved through her courtroom with the particular efficiency of someone who has already seen every version of the thing in front of her and simply needs the current version to present its facts. Gerald Foster opened with his framing. tragic circumstances, innocent child, the deceased no longer able to speak for himself, the importance of biological legacy. Judge Rowe let him finish. Then she said pleasantly, "Counselor, this is a paternity proceeding. Do you have biological evidence?" Gerald said they had documentation of the relationship. Judge Rowe said she understood that. She asked again about biological evidence. Gerald began to explain that court-ordered testing might be traumatic for a child of Caleb's age, and that the family might prefer— "Mr. Foster," Judge Rowe said, not loud, just final. "Paternity is established by DNA. Everything else is context. Is your client prepared to submit to genetic testing?" Gerald leaned toward Renata and said something too quietly to hear. Renata was sitting very still. She was wearing a navy blazer and her hair was pulled back, and she looked, for the first time since the cemetery, like someone who had run out of characters to play and was just sitting there, being herself. "No objection, Your Honor," Gerald said. Carolyn stood. She explained that given the deceased's status, she was requesting court-supervised testing using archived medical samples. Marcus had samples on file from multiple procedures over the years. She also submitted the preliminary forensic report on the handwritten note and requested the court note, the metadata discrepancy on the text messages. Judge Rowe reviewed both. She asked 2 precise questions. Carolyn answered them. Then Judge Rowe said, "I'm ordering genetic analysis using archived samples from the deceased and a corresponding sample from the minor child. Results to be submitted to this court. Counselor." I'm also noting the documentation questions for the record. She looked briefly at Renata. "We'll reconvene when results are available." Her gavel came down. In the hallway afterward, Carolyn and I walked toward the elevator in silence. When the doors closed, I exhaled. "She saw it," I said. "She sees everything," Carolyn said. "That's why I wanted her room." 12 days. That is how long it took for the lab results to come back, and I want to tell you those 12 days were a blur of anxious energy and sleeplessness and dramatic waiting. But that would not be honest. They were mostly just flat. I went to work every day because my job— I do compliance review for a mid-size insurance firm— requires attention and specificity, and attention and specificity were actually easier to access than feeling things. I reviewed documents, I sent emails, I ate lunch at my desk because the break room required making conversation, and I did not have the bandwidth for that. At home, I ate the same rotation of meals: rice and beans, baked chicken. Cereal sometimes, late at night when I didn't want to cook. I watched television I cannot now remember. I cleaned the bathroom twice. I reorganized Marcus's bookshelf by color instead of subject, which he would have hated and which made me feel, briefly, like he was still there to be annoyed by something I did. A woman at my job named Sandra asked me on day 6 how I was holding up. I said fine. She said I seemed tired. I said I was sleeping okay. She looked at me with the particular concern of someone who suspects they are not getting the true answer, but doesn't know how to ask for it, and eventually she went back to her desk. I was sleeping okay. That was the strange thing. I thought I wouldn't be able to, but my body had apparently made its peace with the situation in a way my brain hadn't caught up to yet. Renata, according to Phyllis, was not sleeping as well. She was apparently still telling people the DNA would vindicate her. She'd even started talking about what she planned to do with the house. She'd mentioned repainting the kitchen, which I found so specifically enraging that I had to put my phone face down on the counter and take a lap around the living room to settle myself. The house I had picked out. The kitchen I had tiled with Marcus over a long 4th of July weekend, arguing about grout color for 2 days before agreeing on a warm gray. She was going to repaint the kitchen. On day 12, at 11:23 in the morning, Carolyn called. "Results are in," she said. "Can you come to the office?" "Just tell me." A pause. "Come to the office, Deja." I went to the office. Carolyn's office had a view of the street below and a small plant on the windowsill that she'd had for years and that I had always privately been impressed by, because I could not keep a plant alive to save my life. She had the report open on the desk when I sat down. "No biological relationship," she said. "Zero. The examiner's language is unambiguous. The minor child cannot be the biological offspring of Marcus Eugene Whitfield under any circumstances." I looked at the plant on the windowsill. I had known this was coming. I had known it with complete certainty since the cemetery. There had not been one genuine moment of doubt. Not really. Not when I was being honest with myself. And still, hearing it stated in official language, with a case number at the top of the page, something in my chest released that I had not realized I had been holding. Not triumph, not vindication, just air, like a very long exhale. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we go back to court." We went back to court. Renata arrived at the courthouse already diminished. I noticed it before she spoke. The way she was sitting in the hallway when Carolyn and I arrived, her posture different, the practiced composure gone. Gerald Foster was next to her with his portfolio closed on his knee, which told me everything. She saw me. For a moment, we just looked at each other across the courthouse hallway. I thought she might say something. She looked away. In front of Judge Rowe, Gerald Foster moved to withdraw the claim. He kept it brief and professional. The judge accepted the motion and then did something I had not expected. She addressed Renata directly. "Miss Pearson," she said, "this court takes filing false paternity claims very seriously. You submitted documentation that has been flagged as potentially fabricated. You made assertions under oath that have been definitively disproven by genetic evidence. Do you understand the gravity of what has occurred in these proceedings?" Renata's voice, when she answered, was almost inaudible. "Yes, Your Honor." "Can you explain to this court how you came to make these claims?" And here is the thing that surprised me even then. Renata didn't perform. She didn't cry on cue or manufacture an emotion. She just sat there, smaller than I had ever seen her, and told something that was probably the most honest thing she had said in the entire proceeding. "I convinced myself it was true," she said. I know how it sounds, but I needed it to be true so badly that after a while I think I actually believed it." Judge Rowe was quiet for a moment. "This matter is being referred to the prosecutor's office for review of potential criminal liability," she said. "Ms. Pearson, I would strongly advise you to retain counsel for that process. Mrs. Whitfield, you may wish to consult with your attorney about civil remedies available to you." The gavel came down. Gerald Foster had Renata out of the courtroom in under 2 minutes. I stood in the hallway with Carolyn while people moved around us, and I thought about what Renata had said. I needed it to be true so badly. I thought about Deshaun Mercer and his careful, unattached life. I thought about a little boy with dark curls who had nothing to do with any of this. "I don't want to pursue civil damages," I told Carolyn. She looked at me. "You should think about it." "I have thought about it. I don't want her money. I want her to leave me alone." Carolyn nodded slowly. "I'll make that known." Outside, it was a gray morning, the kind that can't decide whether it wants to rain. I stood on the courthouse steps for a minute before going to the car, just breathing the outside air, just being somewhere that was not a conference room or a courtroom or my house. Carolyn stood next to me. "You okay?" she asked. "Getting there," I said. Darnell called 2 days later. He apologized. I will give him that. But his apology was the kind that carries its own defense built in. He said he had been in a difficult position, that Renata had been very convincing, that he had just been trying to look out for what he thought was right. He said he hoped I understood he hadn't meant any harm. He said he hoped we could move forward. I said I appreciated the call. That was all I said. He seemed to want more, some release, some reassurance that we were okay. And I didn't have it for him. Not yet. Maybe not for a while. My mother came over in person. She didn't call first. She just showed up on a Thursday afternoon, rang the doorbell, and when I opened the door, she was standing there without a casserole or a covered dish or any of the props she usually brought when she needed to say something difficult. She had her purse on her arm and she looked tired in a way that was different from her usual tired. "Can I come in?" she asked. I stepped back from the door. She sat at the kitchen table. Marcus's filing cabinet was still in the corner. And she folded her hands and looked at them for a moment before she looked at me. "I failed you," she said. "I should have asked you questions. I've known Renata my whole life and I know how she is, and I still just accepted what she said before I even spoke to you. That wasn't right." I waited in case there was a but. The but is usually where the real message lives. There was no but. "I'm sorry, baby," she said simply. I sat down across from her. Outside, the late afternoon light was coming through the kitchen window at that particular angle that Marcus used to say made the room look like it was in a painting. I had not been able to look at that light directly for weeks. I looked at it now. "Thank you," I said. "That's what I needed to hear." We sat together for almost an hour. We didn't talk about Renata or the legal proceedings or what happened next. We talked about Marcus, the small things, the private things, the things that don't make it into eulogies, the terrible knock-knock jokes he told that somehow were always slightly too long to land correctly. His insistence on watching Home Improvement shows he never used for any actual home improvement. The way he said good morning, like he genuinely meant it every single time. When she left, she hugged me in the doorway for longer than usual. That evening, Phyllis came over with a bottle of wine and we sat on the back porch, and she didn't ask me how I was feeling and I didn't tell her, and that was exactly right. We sat there until it got dark, and the lights in the neighbors' windows came on one by one, and it was quiet in the specific way of an ordinary Thursday night, all that ordinary life going on around us. I thought, okay, 1 foot. 3 months later, the prosecutor's office reviewed the case and declined to file criminal charges. First offense, documented financial desperation. No money had actually changed hands. And Carolyn had communicated that I wasn't pursuing civil damages, which apparently factored into the calculus. The prosecutor sent a letter. That was the end of it, legally. Renata is living with my parents. I know this because Phyllis tells me things, and because my mother mentions it sometimes in the careful, neutral way she has adopted when talking about anything adjacent to this situation. Renata is there, and she is managing, and Caleb is fine. That's about as much as I know, and it is, for right now, about as much as I need to know. Deshaun Mercer, according to Phyllis, has been in contact with Renata, not willingly. But Phyllis heard from her cousin, who knows his sister, that some kind of conversation happened, and that Renata is now at least not pretending Caleb appeared from nowhere. Whether anything comes of it, whether that little boy ends up with any kind of real acknowledgement from his actual father, I genuinely don't know. I hope so. Not for Renata, for him. Marcus's mother, Lorraine, called me about a month after the ruling. She asked if she could take me to lunch. I said yes. We went to the restaurant Marcus had always wanted to go back to, but we never made it to. One of those old-school soul food places with the handwritten menu board and the sweet tea that's too sweet and the cornbread that's exactly right. We sat across from each other and Lorraine ordered for both of us without asking, which is something I had always found presumptuous in other people and which somehow felt right coming from her. She apologized, fully, without deflection, without explaining what had made it hard to think clearly. She said she knew her son. She said she had always known his character. She said she was ashamed of how quickly she had let someone else reshape what she knew to be true. We talked about Marcus for a long time. She told me a story about him at 11 years old trying to fix a kitchen chair and making it structurally worse, and being so certain of his methodology that he sat down on it confidently and immediately landed on the floor. She said he'd stood right back up, looked at the chair for a moment, and walked away with great dignity, never mentioning it again. I laughed until I had to put my fork down. I've started looking into law school programs, evenings and weekends. Nothing official, just research. Carolyn said I'd be good at it. I'm not sure whether she meant it as a compliment or as a professional observation, but either way, it went somewhere it was needed. I still talk to Marcus. In the car mostly, on the way to work, when I'm sitting in traffic on the bridge and the radio is playing something I don't care about. I tell him how things are going. I told him about the courtroom, about Judge Rowe, about Renata's face when the ruling landed. I told him I had used his medical records to protect myself and that I was glad we'd been meticulous people who kept files. I think he would have found the whole thing genuinely absurd. I think he would have made a joke about it that wasn't quite funny, but was delivered with such confidence that I would have laughed anyway. I think he would have said something like, "She really did not do her research." I miss him for that specifically, for the jokes that were too long and too confident, for the way he made things feel smaller than they were when smaller was what I needed. The house is still mine. The kitchen is still the warm, gray grout we argued about for 2 days on a holiday weekend. The garden in the back is coming up again. I planted it without him the first time, and I planted it without him this time too, and the tulips don't know the difference, and neither does the dirt. And neither, most mornings, do I. I'm still here. That, I think, is enough for now. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.